This is a blind tasting masterclass of something called 5StarWines. This is a competition that was started, I think this is its 10th year. And it is a unique event because it is a competition dedicated only to Italian wines. And the tasting is all done by a combination of producers, enologists, and to a very large extent, people who have passed one or both of the levels of the VIA.
Welcome to the wine2wine Vinitaly Business Forum 2025 Chicago edition, where global wine professionals share insights, strategies, and inspiration from this year's conference. Let's dive into today's session and explore the ideas shaping the future of wine.
Wine2wine House is officially open.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a blind tasting masterclass of something called 5StarWines. How many people know anything about 5-star wines? Some people, but not everybody. Okay, this is a competition.
Yeah, they're judges though. They don't count. I'm sorry.
They can count. Right.
Yeah.
This is a competition that was started, I think this is its 10th year. And it is a unique event because it is a competition dedicated only to Italian wines. And the tasting is all done by a combination of producers, enologists, and to a very large extent, people who have passed one or both of the levels of the VIA, the Vinitaly International Academy tastings. Now, who knows much about VIA, apart from the people who've done VIA? Well, VIA was happening here at the other end of the hall upstairs. How many people this year? How many? 20. So 20 people were taking it here. It is only open, I believe, to non-Italian residents because this lady is a bigot, she said. Anyway, the point is this very, very tough course and exam that I have sat in on and I have not taken the exam yet. And that is also true of Yannick here, has been taken by the lady on my left. And I'm going to ask her, but thank you, Stevie, for the helping here. Basically, Stephanie, I think I'm going to ask her to say a few words about the VIA Academy model, because I think it deserves more attention than it gets. So, Stephanie, how did you get into doing VIA? And I think the lady in front of you may have some responsibility for this.
Yes, it's all due to Stevie. So I had been working for Wine and Spirits magazine as the Italian critic for 10 years, traveling to Italy 4 or 5 times a year. I felt like I knew Italian wine. And Stevie, I had met her, of course, through the course of Vinitaly and wine2wine, and she said, why don't you come to the New York sessions and just audit the course and give me some feedback? And I thought, okay, that'll be easy. I'll just sit there and I'm sure it's a breeze. I know a lot about Italian wine so far. And I sat through the course, 0 preparation, and I thought, oh, this is a little more involved than I thought it would be. And she said, you probably shouldn't take the test. And I said, well, I kind of want to, though. I took the test, and I probably just barely eked by. I did pass it at the ambassador level, which what is that, 65% or something? And I thought, that's really not where I should be. I should be an Italian wine expert. So I decided, I asked her, please, will you let me sit in on the Verona version next year? And I did, this last April. And I prepared this time. And it is intense. There's 600 varieties of Italian varieties that we have that are cataloged, and you have to know basically 400 of them, 200 of them well. And then there's a blind tasting, and if you pass the exam of 100 questions plus blind tasting, then with a 90% or above, then you get asked back to do another blind tasting of 6 wines. And you have to verbally defend your conclusion on those wines, and you have to get 4 of those correct in order to be at the expert level. So fortunately, I somehow eked by on that one too last year, and that's how I got.
So basically, I can tell you, I sat through it. There's no way that I was going to do that exam. And Stephanie, 10 years of focusing on Italian wine, and still, as she very frankly says, only just scraped through the ambassador level. So it takes a level of obsession and effort to actually get through this. My point is, these are the people who are tasting the wines. And to do the exam, they have had to know about the different parts of Etna, the different kinds of Lambrusco, levels of knowledge that, as we've said, masters of wine who have tried it and have failed, 3 masters of wine so far. You probably won't get any more at this rate. So that is basically the background. And what they are told, there are tables of 5 people, and then there's a group of senior judges, of which I am one, and it's an international panel. And our job is to look at all of the wines where there's been a dispute on the table, or the top wines. So we see quite a lot of the wines that go through. How many wines do we have this year, Stevie? A lot. And 3,000, you say? Yeah, a lot. Anyway, and then the winners, the wines that got over 90 points, go into the book, 5-star book, which is now available online. So what the judges get, and you heard this morning, or some of you may have heard the wine enthusiasts talking about how they do their tasting. The same principles apply. You will have a table where you just have Barolos, or you just have Proseccos, or you just have whatever it is. You could give 3 wines the same mark. We're not looking at a winner per table, but you're looking at like with like. So one table got a set of Franciacortas, including some rosés, and that is the wine you have as wine 1 in front of you. So, and the first thing I'm going to say about this is that it is described as a Franciacorta rosé, and it is not the pinkest wine I've ever seen. And I think that's quite interesting in itself, and I think it's revealing, and if we were talking about Provence rosé, we would also see some wines of this color. The label says rosé. And I think the information you're going to be given on the screen that says it had a lot of Pinot Noir, I don't think it did have a lot of Pinot Noir, certainly not as color, but taste it as an example of Franciacorta. Notice that it is 9 years old. And think about that. And I would like to pass the microphone over to Yannick.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you all. I'm quite excited to be here in this beautiful city of Chicago and incredible weather. I've been doing the wine2wine as a judge for a couple of years, and it's really opened up my eyes to the world of Italian wines because, my gosh, it's certainly, infinite, just never ends. And certainly when you do the judging here, you have to come prepared because you are going to taste a lot of wines. But my job as a judge is to just judge what's in the glass and to try not to compare it to anything else, right? And I think that's really important. For example, if I had a glass like this, color would not affect the nose or the profile. I would not allow that. Yes, this is a rosé, but I've had plenty of rosés that almost come across as a white wine. You certainly find that in parts of Provence and the Côte d'Ivoire. But this wine actually scored a 96. I think it's layered, it's complex. It's surprisingly vibrant and youthful for something that's from 2016. I think for most of you that are slightly familiar with the area of Franciacorta, I think it's hard to find something that offers this kind of quality and depth. As I'm tasting this, I'm tasting the same way I would be tasting for the wine store, because I own a wine store in New York City, as well as I'm a director of wine for a pretty big private club. We have over 2,000 SKUs. So when I'm tasting these wines, I'm thinking, what audience would appreciate that? I'm not tasting on behalf of myself. I'm just looking for the quality, because certainly there are wines that I recognize that are of high quality, but maybe don't appease my palate. But that's not how I'm going to judge. Is this a wine that would appease a Franciacorta audience? But would this meet the standards of someone that's somewhat of a champagne snob? And for me, when I'm tasting this wine, this 2016, this Franciacorta Rosé, I think it's layered, it's got depth, the quality is quite high, and the complexity. As I'm talking, I'm still salivating, and it has that long finish. So the same kind of rules that I take for buying for the wine store, and as a sommelier, I do for the judging as well.
I think what's interesting about this wine over and above what Yannick just said is Franciacorta is a young wine, a young region, if you like. And there is some, I won't say controversy, but there's some discussion over the fact that this is a region in Italy which is making wine from the Champagne grapes. which means it's not as typically Italian in some people's view. We could look at Trento and say, that some of the same sort of things. And it's interesting to compare Trento wines with Franciacorta, with sparkling wines from other countries. I come from the UK. I'm not sure that we should have planted Chardonnay and Pinot Noir everywhere in the UK either. But tasting this wine blind, as Yannick just said, to me, it's a very classy fizz. And that's really why it got the mark it did. And I think it carries that 9 years very nicely. There's a lovely freshness there, but there's some weight at the back that I think is carrying it through. So this is a little background of where it's from. Beautiful region. And the cellars. So basically, they've got 17 hectares. They've got Chardonnay, Pinot Blanc, and Pinot Noir. This is made from Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And starts in steel tanks, aged for a minimum of 2 years before disgorgement. I suspect this has had a bit longer. It says 70% Chardonnay, 30% Pinot Noir. I find that interesting. Certainly, the 30% Pinot Noir wasn't delivering the color, or not as much of that. Unless anybody's got any questions of that. By the way, that estate only started in 1989, which gives you an idea of how recent everything is. Second wine is a Colli Tortonese Timorasso. We've seen 1 or 2 Timorassos over the last few days. Stephanie, I think you showed one on the first day. And I would be very happy if you would talk a little bit about this.
So I don't know if you've all had Timorasso before, but it's sort of a relatively new, up-and-coming variety from Piedmont. And it's a grape variety that completely almost had disappeared until the late 80s, early 90s, and it was sort of resurrected by a guy named Walter Massa in this area of Colli Tortonese, which is about an hour and a half east of Barolo. And so this one is from Giampaolo Repetto. So most of the producers in this area are either, there's a few families who've been doing it since the early 2000s, and then there's a lot of Barolo producers who have bought property there and are making Timorasso, but as part of their portfolio with their Barolos. And then the guys like Repetto who are moving into the area actually and living there and vinifying there. And Repetto was an engineer by training, and so he's really only been doing this since about 2015. And he's got this system called Vino Oxygen that he uses, that some of his engineer friends developed, that allows him to vinify the wine without racking and using less sulfur and less water. So it's kind of a sustainable practice. But I think for me, this wine, in terms of the world of Timorasso, if you compare it to others, this is kind of a leaner profile. Sometimes they tend to be a little bit weightier, a little bit more oily textured. This one has a little more of like a kind of a clean profile. It's still, I think, fairly shy on the nose. Timorasso is a variety that really sometimes does require time to show itself to its fullest advantage. And I think this is probably a wine that is in that category, right? It's showing some nice peachy notes now, a little bit of florality, but not much. It's more about the kind of the hydrocarbons at this point, that kind of diesel-y, petrol-y note. But the acidity is quite high, which is also very characteristic of Timorasso and what you would expect. And I like the precision of this wine and the kind of verticality of it. But I can also feel it's sort of like tightly wound. And I think it is a wine that needs maybe 2 or 3 years to really start to show more of its fleshiness and depth. But I think this was a really great version of Timorasso to add to this whole new growing category of wine.
I think the interesting thing to say about this wine is a few years ago, and I've run a lot of wine competitions over the years, and we used to complain about the winning wine always, or the winning wines always being big and oaky and rich and fruity and showy, and this is not any of those things. So it says a lot for the tasters that they recognized the quality of this. This reminds me a little bit of an Assyrtiko from Santorini, and it's one of those sort of new wave wines that are playing on acidity and texture rather than fruit and oak and power.
I felt also some nuttiness,
natural.
on nuts.
Nutty.
Nutty.
Yeah, nutty, thank you. Great, thank you very much.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I get that in the background, but it's for me, it's in the background rather than the foreground. But texturally, there's some character there that I really, really enjoy. The next wine is a Barolo. If you were here 2 sessions ago, there was a Barolo there. And I would like to call Mr. Federico Veronesi. Mr. Veronesi, are you in the hall? Could you come to the wine-to-wine area, please? I have been following Barolo 40 years, because I'm quite old. And when I first tasted Barolos in London and some Barbarescos in London, I thought they were Italy's answer to Cahors. I thought they were tough, tannic, unfriendly, and I really struggled to love those wines. One of the reasons was the way those wines were made was that you had to keep them 10, 20 years before they were actually fun to drink. And then there was the revolution. Well, 2 things happened. One was we moved into individual vineyards rather than blends. Secondly, we stopped using wine from the south to bolster it up, same as used to happen in Burgundy. I'm not saying that the good estates did that, but I'm saying that that is what happened. But thirdly, we moved into much gentler winemaking. And then we had the Elio Altari era, where we had the arrival of small barriques instead of big botti, and a controversial moment because these wines got a lot of praise, particularly from US critics. The barrique character was quite evident. And then over time, we've now gone through other phases since then, where Barolo comes still in various sizes. And there are some people who are still making Barolos that are not that different to some of the Barolos that were made in the 80s. And there are some people who've been into the oak barrels and out again. But that is all the sort of thinking that's going on in one's head when one's tasting Barolo in 2025. And I think one of the things I would say, which I think is very important when you're talking about blind tasting in a competition like this, is we want to put our prejudices and our personal tastes to one side. So basically, I might like this style or that style, but what I'm doing as a judge is saying, is it complex? Does it have layers? Does it have length? Even though it might not fit my own profile of a particular wine, in this case, Barolo. So, what do you think? Have you tasted all this? Have you tasted this wine? Pico Macari, would you like to come and say a few words? Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the hospitality. It's a great chance to be here. So this is Emiliano from the winery, from Pico Macario, based in the Monferrato area. So we own vineyards also in the Langhe, and we started this great project called the Langhe Project years ago, before COVID. And most of our vineyards are located in Serralunga di Alba, so in elevation. This is very important today with the global warming. So we're talking about 400, 500 meters from the sea level. And today we're in the Serralunga di Alba as a comune. So what we're going to taste exactly...
We've got the Barolo. So you're very big in Barbera, I know that.
Yes, we're big in Barbera.
But this is your Canubi. You have half a hectare, I think. Is that right?
Well, it's half hectare, yes. It's 2,600 meters. So out of there, we got less than 1,600 bottles made. And it's on the Canubi Bosques. We had the Appalachian Bosques with a 2021 vintage. And so the last part of the Collina di Canubi is a perfect soil. It's a unique soil that you can find only in Canubi Vineyard. Is the mix of these two tectonic plaque. So with the soil that is unique, you can find everywhere else. So exactly, it's a small production, and it's about 24 months. Also, it's a mix of aging. We use a little bit of French Tonneau, but primarily 60% is a Slavonian cask. So we keep the tradition, we keep the fragrances of the traditional big oak, and a little bit of finer rash with French Tonneau. So we are one of the few producers of Canubi, together with Vignarionda as well in Serralunga. That's why I was talking about elevation. So exactly, with the 18 months in a 500-liter Tonneau.
Thank you very much. So I think you'd call it a modern Barolo?
Well, I would not say it's a modern Barolo, because we keep most of the time of our Barolo inside of traditional big cask versus don't follow 100%. The text sheet, unfortunately, is not the one correct 100%. 60% in is the traditional big Slavonian cask, 3,500 liters.
And I have one question. Why the pencils?
That's another good question. Well, the pencil came in 2014. We were ready to change our poles. So we decided to order 1,600 poles from Calabria, neutral, no color. So once we put it in the vineyard, said we need some color out there because it was not good. So we painted them all and we shaped the pin and it became an icon for us. So this is our signature image, let's say. More than 1,600 just on the road that show the way to come to Pico Macario.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Right, moving on, you have one more red wine in front of you, an Amarone della Valpolicella. And the interesting thing here is, again, just as Barolo went through its, I would say, revolution, Valpolicella has been going through its own revolution recently, especially at the Amarone level and at the Recioto level as well. And one of the reasons for that, if I'm going to be very honest about it, is there's been quite a lot of very cheap Amarone, which shouldn't have been cheap, sold in many countries, including the Nordics and elsewhere, that did not do a lot of favors for the image of Amarone or Valpolicella. We had some with residual sugar. We had a lot that were very heavy, obviously very alcoholic. And I think that this was a wine that was at great danger of going out of fashion. And I think there's a new wave. And if you taste this one, I think this is part of the new wave. I'd like to ask Senor Pasqua, Alessandro Pasqua, to come to the front to talk about this and possibly to explain why we have 2016 on the screen, and that is the wine we tasted for the 5-star book. In fact, the wine you have in front of you is a 2013. I think that was a shipment problem.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you. Nice to meet you. It's a pleasure to be here, for sure. Exactly. I think it was a logistic issue we had. So we repaired that with the current vintage we have in the States, which is 2013, which speaks a little bit to the program that the family is doing in the US to try promote the quality and the specialty of Amarone day and night, which maybe is the opposite of what you said. No, a cheaper version of Amarone, we try to do the opposite, preserve the quality.
So can we quite simply, before we start, what was the difference to you between 2013 and 2016 as vintages in this wine? Because we are tasting a wine that got a high score as a 2016. This is not, the 13 does not exactly resemble the 16 as I remember it.
We start from a comparison, which is with 2016. I think that was a glorious vintage. It was a vintage that maybe was for the ages, for sure in Veneto, probably Tuscany as well as other places. 13 was a very good vintage too, we think. The benefit of this bottle is that it's a very structured wine, a lot of extraction. So I think that those 3 years more give some extra justice to the wine, more balanced, more integration between the tannins and the alcohol, the polyphenols all together, So it was a very good vintage 13, I think, and was one of the first we did with this project.
And so this is a special vineyard. So I've got a picture, I think, some pictures here. Can you talk a little bit about the Mairiamai vineyard?
Of course. Thank you for asking. I think this is a very special project for us that resemble the new generation coming to embrace the family business. It's something that is fairly recent. We started in 2010 with the first vintage and really wanted to be our first big project into the field as far as the new generation of the Pasqua family. It's a very special place. It's an amazing single lot, single vineyard, roughly 23 hectares, 350 meters above the sea level, 360 degrees exposure between the Alps, and you see the Vallo Villasi, Mezzane, you see the city of Verona, maybe Lake Garda if you're very lucky. I don't think so, but maybe. On a good day, it's a hot days, cold nights, is a wonderful place. Plus, the acidity is an amazing limestone, pure composition of the soil with this amazing limestone that give an incredible acidity to the wine. I think you can agree with that.
So can you just say in a few words, what is the difference between this style of what I would call modern new wave Amarone to what maybe a lot of people are used to and what we used to see and still do see a bit of?
I think leveraging on the style of this vineyard, so the acidity that we can grasp from the vineyard, we wanted to give a wine which was not, and I suffer very much when I hear Amarone is a dessert wine, is a little bit like port, which we love port and dessert wine, but we don't want to be just that. And so we wanted to use more acidity to become an eternal wine, you know, with the polyphenol, the tannic structure, the alcohol is 16.5, by the way, but maybe you don't feel that.
I didn't feel that, actually. I didn't get...
You know, the overwhelming factor goes away thanks to this acidity and elegance, maybe. So a lot of elegance we try to pursue.
Thank you very much. Grazie.
Thank you. Grazie, Robert.
Yannick, any comments?
One thing I've been always impressed by, I try to visit the Valpolicella area, and I think I agree with you. It's a region that's underrated based on the reputation made by others. But when you go there, it's real terroir. It's these beautiful hillsides. And then there's these microclimates that certainly exist. And Corvina is a very special grape for sure, and it really belongs in that region. I have a newfound respect for the last few years, especially going into a deep dive of Valpolicella. And it hits all the notes, the bitter chocolate, the chocolate-covered cherries, a little bit of this greenness, which keeps the wine fresh. Overall, very happy with it.
Stephanie?
I would only add that kind of Amarone is, to me, what you were talking about, Robert, more of a food wine. It's like not a meditation or dessert wine, but it is something that you could serve with at a steakhouse or something like that, and it would go perfectly well, and it's not going to overwhelm the food as much as some of those older style, more opulent versions of Amarone.
So, Alessandro referred to port, and some of those wines, as we said, were quite porty. Now we have a wine that is, if you like, competing with port, a Marsala 1998. And this, to me, is a very interesting topic, being British, because we were involved in the invention of port and of sherry and of Marsala and of Madeira. So why? Because we needed to ship wines from one part of the world, Portugal, Spain, Italy, to the UK, and we needed to keep the wine from going off on the boats. So we came up with the idea of adding spirit to it, and wherever we went, we kind of did that. And the thing that is, if you go back 50 years, an English gentleman's home would have always had some port. It might have had some Madeira. Madeira was actually more popular in the States than it was in the UK, but it might have had some of that, and certainly there would have been sherry. Today, I don't know many British gentlemen, but if I did, there's not a lot of port around, there's not a lot of Madeira around. People are not drinking these wines as much as they did. But if we go to France, and we go to Maury down in the south of France, which is their answer to port, if you like, that wine isn't selling very well either. And some of these wines are like Sauterne and late harvest wines, which also are not selling very well. These, I think, sometimes are some of the best value wines on the market, A, in terms of the effort that goes into making them, and B, in terms of the quality of wine you get. So this wine is DOC Ambra Superiore, Reserva, 1998. It comes from Pellegrino, who have been going since 1880. So interesting comparison with the Franciacorta, which wasn't really going in 1980, if you like. So you've really gone from the new to the old. And I quite like these images that we found online. So lots of bush vines. They make 6 million bottles. So when I say the wines are not selling that well, there's certainly a certain amount that are selling. Combination of Grillo, Catarato, Inzolia. They are close to nature. I think a lot of them are organic, but they have 150 hectares of their own land, and they rent a similar amount. And this wine is called Old John, in a tribute to the British guy who first started making Marsala. Yannick, would you like to say anything about this?
Well, wines like this are definitely a sommelier's dream, especially for a tasting menu. As I'm tasting this is what I would call perfect umami. In the back, there's some aged Parmigiano. So this with the aged Parmigiano Conte, these are categories that I really put, like, you've got the sweet, you've got a bit of that bitterness, that saltiness. It hits all the points. And because of the way these wines are made, Amontillado, Oloroso, the Marsala, the Madeiras, they have in excess a good amount of molecular compounds, which make them very food friendly. So hopefully we can continue to teach, especially restaurateurs, to play with these wines, because they are a lot of fun. And it's not until you actually put them in front of a guest, when you put them with the right dish or ingredient, that it really opens up their eyes, because they're not necessarily just for a sweet or an after dinner. You can do them for an aperitif and other courses.
You invited me to ask you the question of which dishes you would serve this with.
But I think for this wine in itself, as I said before, You can do this simply as an aperitif to start it off. My mom is from Bordeaux, and in Bordeaux, they loved having a little red port as an aperitif, was something that was very common. You can do this, again, with things that are heavily salted, right? The H. Comté, the Parmigiano, and all that. I think even I would play with a little barbecue, something heavily with the marinades, right? Kind of overcomes that, because the key with food pairings and wine pairings is that the wine should always be bigger than the dish. It should not be swallowed up by the actual ingredients or the dish itself. And I think this is definitely the main actor when you're pairing, without a doubt.
As you just mentioned, Amontillado, what I love is that extraordinary combination of sweetness, and there's a lot of sugar here, 72 grams per liter of sugar, but what's left on your palate is not sugary sweet. Stephanie?
I would just echo what Robert was saying about these wines kind of being underappreciated. I mean, this category is really what kicked off the trade, the Sicilian wine trade, back in the late 18th century. And a lot of those Famiesse, it was a lot of British people, yes. But the Italian families that got involved with the Marsala trade are some of the same ones that then became the main actors across the whole island of Sicily. And so it's such an important part of Sicilian history. And these wines, I just think this is so beautiful and complex, and it has length, but it is hard to know. It has 18% alcohol, okay? So, there are a lot of people who have an issue with alcohol these days, high alcohol levels. That's what this wine is meant to be, but it's hard to know what to do with it sometimes, when to serve it. But I do agree also with Yannick that when you put it in front of somebody in the right context and with the right food, it's hard not to like this wine. It's just a beautiful wine, I think.
To me, we've just opened 4 75 centiliter bottles of this wine to serve to you. This wine should not be in 75 centiliter bottles. If you go to South Africa, the Vin de Constance is in a 50 centiliter bottle. I think this could be in a 37.5, if you like. But to me, in terms of the alcohol, I am not going to drink nearly as much of this 18% wine as I would drink of a 13 or whatever percent. To me, this is the sipping. This is the vino di meditazione. And I just think that it is wine of sophisticated pleasure. I would argue that maybe Sauterne is less sophisticated pleasure, because it's sweet, it's instantly gratifying. This is kind of grown-up pleasure.
Robert, sorry to interrupt, but I have a Stevie pushing me to say nuttiness again for this one.
Nuttiness.
She's my boss.
Can I just say, this one has nuts to spare.
Okay, perfect.
This has got all the nuts you found earlier and a lot more. I love it.
Okay.
And I just think that, but it's got a lot of complexity. You've got fruit and nuts.
In regards to your comment to the 50 centiliter bottle, I do find, though, that this wine has extended aging capacity even after you open it, right? Like, it will last so much longer, because almost anything that could happen to it has happened to it already. It's going to, you can open it and have a glass and keep it for probably a few weeks, even longer. So don't be afraid to open it, even if you're not drinking it.
And I think you're making a very good point. I keep a lot of wine in the fridge. If I'd open this would be in the fridge, and I would get through it in a few days. But I don't know that everybody wants to do that. And I think that I just keep thinking of that Vin de Constance. Also, any Canadians in the room by any chance?
Yes.
I know, that's what that's what I meant. Think about all that ice wine sold in those little bottles for prices that I personally think are sometimes exaggerated. This, to me, is a more sophisticated competitor to all of those. I think Stevie is going to leap across that table in a minute to throw us out.
Okay, let's just wrap it up. Thank you very much. Stephanie Johnson, Robert Joseph, Yannick Benjamin. I think we do have an issue that people don't know what 5-Star Wines is. I have to admit, I think this could be a problem. I mean, there's the lunch issue, but maybe people just don't know what it is.
So, Stevie, can you tell people now how everybody in this room and anybody who can hear us, how can they find the online version of the book?
It's called Google.
Thank you. What's it called? What's the book called?
5-Star, number 5,
Yep.
Star Wines, one word.
And it's available through Google.
You type in 5-Star Wines on Google,
Yep.
and then it'll get you to wherever you need to go.
There isn't a website or anything specific.
It's called 5-Star Wines.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Stevie.
All right, thank you very much, you guys.
Listen to the Italian Wine Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Himalaya FM, and more. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the show. If you enjoy listening, please consider donating through ItalianWinePodcast.com. Any amount helps cover equipment, production, and publication costs. Until next time, cin cin.